What's up, everyone, and welcome into a special episode of the Buffalo Sports Collective. Today, we have the pleasure of talking with San Diego Seals play-by-play man and co-host of the newest NLL lacrosse podcast out there, the NLL Box Out with Mackey and Coop. Cooper Perkins joins the BSC today. Cooper, thanks for joining us, and how's it going?
Hey, man, thanks for having me. Things are going great. We've got an awesome week of lacrosse. You know, we're finally at that point in the season where stuff's actually happening. You know, how, like, they tease us into it for, 7 or 8 weeks where they're like, oh, here's one 6-game week, but now there's 3 games, and you just got to sit on your hands all weekend. So I'm pretty fired up about it. You know, I'm excited that I get to be there and actually get to take in the game of the week. But it's just the best. You know, this time of year when things are really busy in the lacrosse world, it's a blast.
Yeah, we're finally getting meaningful games, and teams are sort of sorting themselves out in the standings. We've been saying for, the last 10 weeks, we're not sure. There's the Bandits, then it seems like the Seals are breaking apart, and then there's just a cluster from 3 to 10, and I think any team within 3 to 10 is within a game of 3rd place or 10th place, which is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you got the Bandits and the Rush, and then you got the Desert Dogs and the Firewolves, and then everywhere else is just a mess, just a total mess.
So I've been meaning to do this for a while now. I actually just moved into my house 2 months ago. So starting
congratulations.
This idea, thank you. We moved from one area to our final house. I've been telling my wife and everybody else the next move is me to the grave. I'm not moving again. This is my final house. But I wanted to try to give the NLL and the Bandits, especially since that's our main focus here, more of an NFL touch. So leading up to the next game on the schedule, I wanted to get somebody in that knows more than just me or Phil talking about the team that's next on the opponent. So for us, that's the Seals, and that's why I got you on. But before diving into the Seals, I wanted to quickly get your thoughts on the growth of the NLL. While there have been some steps back, Panther City folding, for example, it seems like the league, at least from an outsider's looking in, is on the right direction. Now, have you seen that same growth the last couple of years since that COVID lockout season?
You know, I think it's interesting because there are a couple different prongs to this idea, right? Everyone looks at growth and immediately goes to attendance numbers, and I kind of think that that's wrong for a couple of reasons. The first of which is, what quality of fans are you growing, right? Are you just getting people that show up to a game, or are you getting people that are invested in the product? And, yes, financially speaking, I think teams would rather have 9,000-10,000 in the building than 4 or 5. But as far as what the quality of the product looks like, I think we'd rather have invested fan bases that make for good crowds. And, I think San Diego is the best example of that. Everyone likes to make fun of San Diego's attendance numbers. Everyone likes to say that they're inflated. And, yeah, they probably are. There are tickets that are out. They're not necessarily people in the building. But I think you'll probably see this, even just watching the broadcast this weekend. And if you haven't watched a lot of Seals games at home, it really does make a huge difference, the quality of fans that they've grown there. They are educated and really invested in every aspect of the game. It sounds stupid to say they know when to cheer, but that actually isn't something we can take for granted because there are a lot of nuances to lacrosse. It's kind of like football, right? If you just pick someone up who had never watched any sports and drop them in a box lacrosse game, they'd be like, what the hell's going on? Why are they throwing flags? What is this whistle? I don't understand it. He pushed him. Why is that push wrong? There's a lot of really nuanced stuff that goes into this. So I think that the league as a whole, and San Diego is a great example of this, is growing quality fans. The one thing that I think they may be a little bit misguided in, and this isn't a league thing so much as it is an ownership thing in different markets and prospective ownerships. I think Panther City failed at this, and this is something that is easily avoidable. Trying to grow the wrong kinds of fans. There's a conventional wisdom in sports that you want to grow fans from when they're young, and then you have fans for life. Well, but 7-year-olds don't have money. So what are we really doing here? That doesn't really make a huge difference. I mean, it does in theory on paper, but I've always talked to people behind the scenes in the lacrosse world about why isn't there a team in Palm Springs, California? No, it is not a major league market, which obviously is something the NLL really values, being in those big league markets, the big league facilities. But look at what they've done with the hockey team there, the Firebirds. If you're not familiar, they play in a grand spanking new arena that is beautiful and perfectly equipped for lacrosse. And their fan base is 80% people 70 years and older. And so what they've done there is figured, hey, we're not going to grow fans from when they're young. We're going to find fans that have the money to come to games, are looking for something to do. And guess what? There's going to be a whole population that keeps going. You know, it's a little bit macabre to say that you grow fans for like 10 or 15 years that way, but like it's kind of true. You got to look at people who have time to spend and have money to spend. And so I would really love to see the NLL be a little bit more proactive in pursuing those demographics. I don't know how realistic it is because the priorities that are in place, you know, really don't want to go that minor league route of being in smaller markets, being in smaller buildings. But if a hockey team in the middle of the desert with a population that's almost exclusively 65 plus can fill a barn 41 times a year to the gills, there's no reason an NLL team can't do that in Palm Springs or a similar market 9 times a year, you know? So it's a long-winded way of approaching your question about growth in that I think that there is some really quality growth in the quality of fans, but I think that there's some outreach that's being overlooked that I think all markets, not just new markets, would be really well served to pursue. You know, it doesn't seem like going to like a senior center would be number one on your list of places to outreach for lacrosse because you're thinking about growing kids that are playing. But let's supplement that with looking for people that want to be entertained because ultimately the NLL and lacrosse is really goddamn entertaining. And there are people that just don't know about it and need to be reached and expecting them to be brought there by like their grandkids or like their 20-year-old nephew. I just don't see how that works. So, you know, I think with all things there's room for improvement, but, you know, I think that the league consolidating a little bit with the Panther City move is disappointing, but not necessarily a bad thing. I think that that market really needed a fresh start and it wasn't going to get it just staying there. So hopefully when they reboot that project, and I don't think expansion's on the table in the near future, but when it is, I hope that there's a fresh perspective that's taken to fan outreach and fan base growth.
Yeah, so I mean, the man leading the charge is Brett Fruit. Been on the job. This is his third full season on since August of 2022. Now, how do you think he has done entering his third full season? You know, the training wheels are off. He's full go on this. You know, he's a big lacrosse fan, and he was brought in more for his background in the marketing business and, you know, growing the revenue in that area. You already mentioned, you know, the plan for is not in the cards for the expansion. And he said that multiple times that, you know, that could be down the road, but immediately we want to build up our current 14 teams that are still part of the league. How do you think he has done the last or going into his third year in August coming up?
I think you have to really be generous when you grade Brett. And I'm not saying that as someone that's affiliated with the league, that's employed by the league. This is a personal opinion. I think that anytime you walk into a new job, there's like a probationary period where more than anything, you're trying to get the lay of the land. So now take that concept and overlay it on the fact that he's now becoming the boss of the whole thing. So I think that he's taken a little bit of a conservative approach to figuring out what needs to change. And so I think while fans want to see things change immediately and they want to see these big moves, that's not necessarily realistic in the business world because first and foremost, he has to make sure that the league isn't taking steps backwards before it's taking steps forwards. And, you know, the previous commissioner's situation just flatly was really complicated. And I think that, you know, principally among things, Brett has brought a degree of quiet stability. And I think one thing about him that I value, and I know that a lot of people around the league and in team ownership value, is that he's not an attention guy. You know, you might want a commissioner to be forward-facing, but would you rather have like a Rob Manfred from Major League Baseball, who is widely recognized as one of the most hated men in the sport that he oversees? Or would you rather have someone like Brett Fruit, who isn't quite so forward? Now, I think there's definitely room to be more dynamic, and I was hopeful that there might be some more significant changes coming into this season, but also with the collective bargaining agreement in the position that it's in and figuring that that's going to be a pretty, you know, sticky negotiation this offseason, it doesn't surprise me that there's been a little bit slower approach to making wholesale changes, because I don't think they know what the league is going to look like financially in terms of what the revenue sharing agreements are and who's getting what and what that means for how they have to raise money. So I think that Brett deserves a lot of grace in grading his performance. And that's not apologizing for the fact that, since he's taken over, they've lost a team and haven't really grown that much. Nothing in life is as good or as bad as it looks. And I don't think that that's any different in this situation. You can't fault him for some of these things. I mean, the Panther City debacle, I don't think is Brett's responsibility at all.
He inherited it, yeah.
I think he inherited it, and I think that was a time bomb that unfortunately was set off by individuals that weren't invested enough in the National Lacrosse League. They were invested in business, and I don't know the people who were at the top in Panther City, so I don't want to be overly critical or too harsh, but when we look at Brett's resume, I think we have to do more projecting than reflecting. And I'm pretty optimistic. My conversations with him, I found him to be a really thoughtful and interesting guy. I think he's really well positioned to do some interesting things on like the media and broadcast side. They're making good investments in those areas. I think if they can continue to build on like their sponsorship sales, which we're starting to see, right? Like there's a hotel sponsor in the broadcast now. Like that snuck in there. People didn't notice that. If they can add a flagship beer or something like that. I'm not a salesperson, so I don't know what the dynamics of those things are, and I can't say that people should do their jobs better. That's not my role. That's not my place. But I think we can be hopeful because Brett's a marketing guy. Brett's a sales guy. Brett knows how to make partnerships happen, and I really am optimistic that that's going to happen, and it's going to happen in a big way. I just think that there's some roadblocks in front of him that have made the launch of this process a little bit slower. The Panther City situation, the upcoming CBA renegotiation. Once those things are clearly behind us, I think we're going to see Brett be pretty active. And I think we're going to see a lot more significant changes. Maybe people will like, maybe they won't. I don't know. I don't know what the changes are going to be. But I think Brett is doing as good of a job as anyone could do, given kind of the handcuffs that the job has had the first couple of years, and also recognizing that there was a really significant interest on the part of ownership groups to kind of reorganize the league structure from a management and like a C-suite executive standpoint. So they're all kind of figuring out where the pieces fit and how to fit it all together. And I think that they deserve a pretty solid grade for that. Now, everyone likes to complain about leadership when things aren't moving as quickly as they might like it to, but I would encourage people to be patient because I think Brett really is a good fit for the league, and I think that his skills are really going to make themselves visible in the next 2, 3, 4 years.
So last one before we can dive into some of the Seals. I'm going to put you in Brett Frood's seat here. Now, moving forward, we already mentioned the CBA is up after this year. We had the comments of Jamie Dowick, who, I think they mentioned it on Lax Class the other day. Well, he was on a 5-game losing streak. Talk to him now, his feelings might be different. And they talked to the PA afterwards, and everybody seems like they want what's best for the league moving forward, and they all understand that a missed year is not healthy for the league as a whole. But I'm putting you in the seat. It could be the CBA, it could be marketing, whatever it is. What do you think in the next year that if you were in charge, what would be that one improvement, either the quality of the league on or off the field?
I think that some kind of potential lockout hanging over the league makes business a little bit more difficult, and that matriculates its way into things like broadcast deal, negotiations. And I think that the NLL is doing some interesting stuff in trying to be creative, and we'll find out what the results of that creativity are in the next couple of years. Like the NLL Plus platform is an interesting case study in that, right? That's something that was kept very quiet really until it launched, and it has a clear agenda of trying to make lacrosse more accessible internationally. It also serves as a little bit of a leverage point when you think about it, right? That you have this non-exclusive broadcast deal with ESPN. Well, let's use our assets a little bit more proactively. And I think that that's really encouraging because that creativity is something that we can bank on them continuing to develop in different areas. If I'm in Brett's seat, my first thought is obviously you cannot have a full season that gets missed. That unequivocally cannot happen. He doesn't have the power to decide that, though. That's something that people need to understand. If there is a worst case scenario that does develop, it's not going to be at least 100% because of a failure by the commissioner. He's basically a mediator in this situation. And so the responsibility of getting the product on the floor falls on owners, but players probably as much, if not more, because there's this chasm within the player group, right, where you have the handful of guys that can make full-time careers playing lacrosse, but the vast majority are not that. And because of that, I think that there's going to have to be a little bit of kind of huddling up done on the part of the players to figure out what's best for the collective group as opposed to what's the most optimal for them hypothetically. I think the owners are also in a similar situation where, they got to make money. These are businesses. So if I'm Brett, I'm kind of holding my breath going into this, hoping for the best, but also recognizing that the worst is something that, they'd very much like to avoid. And I'm very confident that they will. Every conversation I've had leads me to believe if there is any kind of lockout, the costs to both sides of it being a full season lockout are so astronomical that it's not really a leverage point for either side. It's kind of a self-defeating thing to lean back on. So I think it's really, really unlikely. The area where I'm the most interested, and maybe this is me speaking from a biased perspective as someone who works in media and on the broadcast side of the NLL, I'm really interested to see where the next broadcast agreement comes from and what that looks like. I know there are a lot of different things floating in the background that, not permitted to speak on, but I think that what I can say is that there's a lot of creativity in the works, and if I'm Brett, I would encourage that creativity. Now, Brett, you got to remember, also isn't just a business guy that is great with marketing. He's also a really well-connected guy on the media side, and that's something that's kind of flown under the radar to the general fan public. It's something that people who work on the media side and work on the team side are aware of, but I think that if I'm Brett, I leverage those relationships and that access to really try and optimize the next broadcast deal for exposure, but also for some kind of financial benefit. There has to be a way for the league to really start making money on television in the way that big, major four sports do. And there's a pathway to that. And I actually think that Brett's as well qualified as anybody, if not more, to, route things down that road. But it's a tough spot to be in, for sure, because you're looking at maintenance being priority number one, because you're trying to keep the 14 markets healthy. You're trying to make the 14 markets healthier while also trying to make sure that there's a product to sell. So, chicken and egg problem, right? What do you worry about more? The product itself or selling the product? So I think Brett, in this case, is going to be really well served by having been a little bit more of a watch, observe, take notes, and then take action when the time presents itself. So, I probably didn't answer your question all that well because I didn't give you a 3-point plan of what I would do if I was Brett Frood. And the reason for that, quite simply, is I'm really happy I'm not. I think that's a really, really hard job right now. And I think that while he's really well equipped and really well liked, and it's going to be something that I'm encouraged by going forward, I don't know that I want to put myself in his shoes too much because A, there's a lot of details that I don't know, but B, God, those are really hard problems.
Oh yeah, and the next few steps are so critical for this league if they truly do want to be the next major league. And but some people might say,
to that point, before we move on, I just want to say I really think that the people at the league are great fits for what they're trying to accomplish. Not every organization is 100% full of the best fits, but I really, in every interaction that I've had with people at the league, think that they have the NLL's best interest in mind for the most part. We all are fallible people, right, where our own interests are a factor in things, and wanting to make sure that we do a good enough job in the things that we're doing right now as opposed to prospecting for the things we're going to do down the road. But these are really creative people, and they're really experienced people with a lot of, diverse experiences at high levels under their belts. So, the NLL is in a spot that I think is unenviable from a navigating terrain perspective, but I don't think that the people in charge are unequipped. If anything, I think they're pretty well equipped to manage that.
Yeah, I mean, I've liked the majority of changes or improvements or whatever's come out of the front office. There's always going to be bits and pieces that, people might like more than others, but from an outsider's perspective looking inward, I've liked the majority of the things they have done. Like ESPN Plus, absolutely love it. I mean, we've been saying on this show 4 years, you just got to get this product in front of eyes that typically wouldn't see it. I've never brought a person to a Bandits game, and I know Banditland's a little bit different than other places around the NLL, but I've never brought a person or a potential fan to a game and they've said, hey, this is kind of boring, or, why are you bringing me to this? It's always, when's the next game? How do I get more tickets? Can I watch this elsewhere? It's an electric product. It's just getting it to the eyes that typically wouldn't see it, and that's been the biggest hurdle. But I thought ESPN Plus was great, and ESPN or NLL Plus, I think, is the next wave moving forward.
And it gets lost in the shuffle, and it seems insignificant, but the fact that the NLL is now on the ESPN Scores app, I think is really, really, really important. It doesn't seem like something that would be all that significant because it's just scores on an app. That's not true. It's the app. It's the sports consumer's app. You want to get in front of eyeballs and have people just be curious and wonder, what the hell is this? You got to be there. So, is it the biggest move in the history of moves? No. But fans really need to think about that for a second and give the league people credit that made that happen, because ESPN historically has not been easy to work with for anybody. ESPN has all the power. They always will have all the power. So to be able to navigate that and land that platform with the Scores app is a tremendous step in that direction of getting in front of curious sports fans that otherwise wouldn't be exposed to lacrosse. Even if it's just seeing a zany logo and seeing like the Calgary Roughnecks logo on the Scores app, and you're like, the hell is that? That looks interesting. That's something. And that's something that wouldn't happen elsewhere. So, I just wanted to point that out because there are little things, or seemingly little things, that the people at the top have done that are actually a lot bigger than they might look like, and that's a really good example of one.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the small details that might go unnoticed by the average fan, they are purposely done by the higher ups, and that's another reason why I'm so confident in the leadership group under Brett Frood on if there is the next step in the next direction. I love that he's one of the ones that is leading the ship to it. But we'll move on to the San Diego Seals. Fresh off 2 epic comeback victories. First one in Mississauga versus Toronto. You had the Westberg last second game-winning goal beating Nick Rose from the outside, and then overtime in Buffalo. They led early, let it slip a bit, but winning in Banditland is no easy task. I mean, it's rarely ever done the last few years, but they're sitting 5-5 on the season. If there was one word to describe their season so far, what would that be?
One word.
Can hyphenate multiple words if you need to.
I think Helter Skelter would be a little bit too low-hanging of fruit. So I'm just going to go with oops. And I say that because the issues that they've had are issues that they definitely didn't expect to have. And they're definitely issues that couldn't have been planned for given what they did in the offseason. Now, it's always easy to, armchair quarterback and Monday morning quarterback and say, oh, well, you bring in all these new bodies. Of course, things aren't going to fit together right away. Well, they did on Thanksgiving weekend. They scored 18 goals against Philadelphia, who, albeit their defense has been pretty shaky most of the season. We learn that now. But they came out of the gates really hot. So I think that there has not been any lack of focus and effort or chemistry at any point. The thing that has come to the forefront, and maybe the best word that I should use here is overly unselfish. And that has been self-defeating at times, where you have all of these pieces offensively that are really capable scorers and facilitators, and sometimes that's just added up to too many guys moving the ball, getting a touch, and not enough, kind of the alpha male I want to score. And that's something they've had in the past, right? You think about some of the names that have exited the Seals, and Dane Doby, Curtis Dixon, and guys that are scorers by trade. They don't really have a scorer by trade anymore. Ryan Benesh, I guess, is that to some extent. He's later in his career, so I don't know if that same potency is there every week. He's dealt with some nagging stuff, just like everyone does to some extent. But when you're 40 years old, it carries a little bit more weight than it does when you're 22. So I think that the over unselfishness has probably been their biggest issue. I think, though, my favorite word that I'm going to use is actually entertaining, because all of it's been unexpected. Everything about this team has been unexpected. The offseason overhaul was unexpected. The early season explosion with all these new faces was unexpected. The tremendous offensive struggle they went through for about 4 or 5 weeks, that was unexpected. Now here we are, 5-5, back-to-back wins over Toronto, who at one point was probably the hottest team in the league, and Buffalo, who is still the consensus 5-alarm wagon fire #1 team in the NLL. That's all pretty unexpected. So we'll see how it plays out. 8 games is a lot of games left to be played, and that could go a whole lot of different directions based on how unexpected everything has been to this point. But I gave you 3 different words, maybe, each individually with their own explanation, but I think that's where we're at in San Diego. Nothing is for sure at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of ties into my next question. I'll rework it, but it was about, the new pieces coming in, but you said, they kind of gelled well, and it was almost too unselfish. Do you think these last 2 games, what you've seen out of Wes Berg, where, 9 goals, the game winner in Buffalo, the game winner the week before in Toronto, do you think that it's more of them figuring out, okay, who's the main go-to guy that they're working through? Or do you think it's just Wes Berg stepping up and just going like, I'm the captain here. When the time's needed, I'll be the one that steps up and I'll point this offense in the direction that it needs to go in?
It's kind of tough to say, because Wes is such a cool guy, first and foremost. Like, he's the best. He's also not a particularly assertive, aggressive fellow. I mean, I've never played with or against him, so I can't really speak to what his mentality is on the floor. But I have a hard time believing that he woke up before the Toronto game and decided, the hell with this, I'm the guy. I think what's probably been the most likely situation is that the off-the-floor chemistry, which has been there since day one, is a lot of these guys have played together a lot. I mean, Wes grew up playing with Ben McIntosh. They're 2 really, really close friends. He's played with Rob Hellier. All these guys have been all around the league and playing summer ball, obviously, up in Canada as well. So I think of it more as the seeds of off-floor chemistry have finally blossomed into on-floor chemistry. And I don't know that we're going to see Wes Berg, keep scoring 4 or 5 goals a game. I think there may actually be a little bit more spreading of the wealth, but I don't think it's going to be on purpose. I think that there may have been a little bit of a need for someone to set an example of, we just got to shoot the ball. But I think that that's probably going to be contagious, because at the end of the day, these guys are all goal scorers. Rob Hellier is a 40-goal scorer. Ben McIntosh has had 10 30-goal seasons. Ryan Benesh has almost 600 career goals. So I think that desire to shoot was laying dormant maybe for a little bit, because there was such great off-floor chemistry that just kind of having fun and keeping everyone happy felt like a priority. But then you get into crunch time and you get a little bit desperate, and all of a sudden winning becomes more important than anything else, and that off-floor chemistry starts to matriculate its way into the on-floor product, and now you got guys like Wes Berg stepping up. One thing that I do want to highlight, though, that gets lost in the shuffle is how much of an impact Trey Leclerc makes. He doesn't have any stats to back it up right now, but he changes their offense completely because he's the most athletic guy on the floor. And that's saying a lot, because Wes Berg is super athletic. Zach Currier is super athletic. Trey Leclerc is a specimen and just something to marvel at. So I think that his re-entering the lineup 3 weeks ago Yeah, they still struggled against Saskatchewan. They lost that game. The offense, though, in the second half, coincidence perhaps that after a half of lacrosse and getting his legs back, beneath him, Trey Leclerc, since that halftime deficit of 7-0 against Sask, this offense has been completely different. And I think that not only does the chemistry play a big role, but just simply having different kinds of weapons and that degree of athleticism makes a much bigger impact, whether it shows up in the box score or not, than people recognize.
And that's what it is with a lot of pieces where, you take one piece away that might not have the box score numbers, but it drastically changes the offense. And, Buffalo went through this all offseason. Me and my co-host Phil were going like, okay, Brandon Robinson's out the door. How does that affect a guy like Josh Byrne, who, while Brandon Robinson's in the lineup, he has an MVP type of season? You remove him, how does that affect the flow of the offense? And you add Ian McKay to it, and it's a whole different story. That's not why I have you on here, but it is something that maybe an average fan might not put the pieces together that, hey, he's only putting up 1 goal, 1 assist a game. What's that big of a deal? But it's all the intangibles of what also he does when the ball's not in his stick, the hard picks that he sets, the lanes that he sets. So I love the name of Trey Leclerc. I was a big fan of him. And when we were previewing the game, I'm looking at the names and I'm going, he's one of like 3 players still here from the last time Buffalo faced this team, like a year and a half ago. It's insane. But the other name, and the left side of San Diego has been a big question mark going into the season as well. And the team made a big splash last week, signing Pat Cavanaugh, I apologize, to a 2-year deal. And he's been more known for his field game than box game. Now, he signed a 2-year deal. Is this somebody that you could possibly expect to see later on down this season? Or because it's a 2-year deal, are they more expecting him to make his presence known next season?
That is a really good question, and my answer to that would have been different 5 days ago than it is now. I don't know if we will see him, but I do know that is definitely something that they would be interested in if circumstances permit. I thought he was kind of like an NBA-style draft and stash when I saw that signing, and that was with no knowledge of anything from anyone in the organization off the bat. But after a conversation or two that I've had, it seems like he's actually very much in their plans. And I don't know how much of an impact he's going to make as kind of a first-time box guy. That's always such a crapshoot. But we're also seeing really talented field guys like Mikey Sowers suddenly show up and actually make an impact with no box experience at all. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think that if he does make his way into the lineup, he brings a degree of dynamism that is missing from that left side. And I think he may be more well-equipped for the box game than some people might think because his toughness is like in baseball scouting terms, he's got like 80-grade toughness. So I think that style of play may translate well, but there is also so much nuance to learn and things to figure out. And I would be really interested to see what it looks like. I know he's not going to be a part of things this week, but it sounds like he could be getting into the fold potentially in a practice setting at least much sooner than I'd thought originally, which definitely raises my intrigue level about the signing.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Sowers, I thought that was going to be a later, if this season at all, type of thing, and he's come in and already made noise in 2 weeks. So it's a much different game in between the boards there, a lot less room. But when you mention toughness, I mean, that's what you got to be an NLLer. But another player on the left side that's getting a bunch of time out the front door is Zach Currier. Now, I don't really have to say much more than his name, but for the average NLLer that might just be introduced into this league, that deal that San Diego and Calgary made in this offseason shocked and made magnitude waves across the NLL. So if you're just an average fan, this is like, I don't know, a MVP type of player in the NFL getting traded to another team in the offseason. So
I mean, it was kind of a cousin of like the Lakers and Mavs trade from a couple of weeks ago. You got a young player in his prime who's a superstar and already well established, and another future Hall of Famer who's a little bit older going the other direction. I mean, it was a crazy move. And I know he's someone they'd coveted for a long time because everyone covets Zach Currier.
Right.
I mean, I think he's the league's MVP if San Diego wins 11 games. If they finish the season 6-2, make the playoffs in a 3, 4, 5 seed, his impact on the floor is limitless. I mean, he leads the team in loose balls. He's had at least one caused turnover in every game. He has 20 of them. And that's a light season for a guy who's only playing like half the game out the back door right now. I just think that he's such a special talent that it's fun to see him get an opportunity to be an offensive guy. Because, right, he was an attackman at Princeton. The guy knows how to score. That's not like something that is just figuring out now. But he's never been in a position where that was needed because he's playing in Calgary, and he's more valuable as a transition threat than he is as a settled 5-on-5 threat. But the role in San Diego is a little bit different and a little bit more dynamic. And I actually think that that's part of what makes San Diego an interesting matchup. I don't mean to potentially unravel any of your other questions, but this came up earlier this week in a conversation that the thing with San Diego is that they're starting to play almost positionless to a point where they're using multiple guys in two-way capacities, right? They're using Zach Currier as a two-way guy. They're using Trent DeChico as a two-way guy. And you could look at them and say, well, they're not really scoring, not a lot at least. So how much does that matter? Well, we saw it against Buffalo. I made an appearance on the Daily Dive the other day, and the thing that Mike asked me was, did San Diego show the blueprint on how to beat Buffalo? I was like, no, there's no blueprint on how to beat Buffalo. It's hope that Dane Smith and Josh Byrne don't have big games, and hope that you have enough speed to potentially exploit transition like San Diego was able to. There are like 3 teams in the league that have enough speed to do that. But Zach Currier has unlocked this almost, I don't want to call it accidental because I don't live inside Patrick Merrill's head, but it's unlocked this almost philosophy change in San Diego where they've gone from being a get the offense on the floor with 12 seconds on the shot clock, play a little bit of 5-on-5 and hope for a good shot and just have good scorers, to now being this dynamic team that wants to run you into the ground. And Zach Currier is kind of what makes that possible first and foremost because of how athletic, how talented both ends of the floor he is. I mean, that guy is a unicorn. I mean, every stat line he has, right, is like 5 players crammed into one. It's not 3 goals, 2 assists, 14 loose balls, a caused turnover, and a block last week. Like that, what? That's nuts.
Yeah. I mean, I saw a stat line. I knew he was having a good game, but then after the game, you're looking at the stat line and just going, holy crap. Like, did the guy play all 60 minutes? But then you're looking at the, all the fan pages for the Bandits, and they're going, how does Matt Vince let that type of shot go in with 5 seconds to go? And I'm like, other teams have great players. Zach Currier is a fantastic, one of the best players in the entire league. Maybe it wasn't Matt Vince that let it go through. Maybe it was just an amazing shot that he was able to pull off going top corner like that. You have to recognize that other teams have great players. It's not just all Buffalo, but you mentioned another name in there. Trent DeChico. Now, in this last draft, they drafted Jacob Power 12, Robbie Turpin 14, Cam Achoni in the 3rd round. Now, Turpin's only played in 1 game, and we haven't seen a bunch from these guys, but we have seen a ton from Trent DeChico. It seems like early on in the season before Kyle Jackson came back that he was running out the front door. It seems like he's settled into a nice role coming out the back door now. And you mentioned speed. He's one of those players that adds speed to this team. But what have you liked from him this season in his 10 games as a rookie? Because I was shocked he fell to you guys at what was it, 9? But, I mean, it might look back, 5-10 years from now, could be a steal of the draft.
I think the first thing that comes to mind when you talk to anybody in the organization about him is just how scrappy he is. He makes everything a contested play. That was true when he was playing out the front door exclusively. It's true out the back door now. But I think what's so valuable about him is that he is trustworthy everywhere. And that enables them to do more of what I was just kind of talking about with Zach Currier, and almost carelessly and irresponsibly push the ball at times because there's so much trust in the talent. I think he's going to develop into a really nice offensive player at some point. I think Trey LeClaire is a good example of a guy who started his career out the front door, was not an impact guy, did not have the refined NLL skill set despite having a tremendous number of tools at his disposal. They moved him to a transition guy down the stretch of his rookie year. He was excellent, played there much of his second year, and then last year moves back out the front door, and all of a sudden he's a different player. I think it's a tale as old as time in the NLL, right? Young forwards who start out the back door. Look at Dane Smith, right? These are guys that have something different about them. Usually it's athleticism and grit, and then you couple it with developing skill, and it's something that marries really well together in the long term. So I think that the Trent DeChico question is most well addressed by his intangibles and his athleticism, but it's with the knowledge that his development is still pretty early in its process, and there's a lot to like about what that ceiling looks like as the skills, the familiarity, speed of the game, all those things come into place. You know, maybe some more dynamic left-hand offense. Yeah, he's not necessarily playing on the most loaded left side. I mean, it has guys for sure, but you compare it to what it was a year ago and what it is now. You know, Trent DeChico has to do a little bit more when he's playing offense than he would if he's playing with Dane Dobbie, you know, or who have you. So I think that his athleticism and, you know, just the dynamic quality that he brings to the floor is something that is just ultra valuable and is only going to become more visible as his skill develops more and makes him more of that two-way threat. I'm really curious what their long-term plan is with him, because I honestly do not know. I don't know if they want him to be a full-time guy at the front door down the road, or if they're seeing kind of the glimpses of what the positionless Zach Currier looks like and thinking, if we had two of those guys, that'd be pretty interesting. You know, so it's little seeds getting planted, but I think there's really a lot to like just because of so much natural talent and gift in just what is a really athletic young body.
Yeah, I mean, it could look similar to what Calgary did last year with Currier and Simpson. You could have Currier and DeChico running the transition game, which I thought Calgary's was one of the most deadly in the entire league. So if you just pass that over to San Diego, that's another aspect that other teams got to plan for that is tough with that offense that's really thriving right now. But the team has had their fair share of injuries. I think that's across the league, but I think San Diego's back end has been hurt especially. You have Kyle Rubisch, who's missed 3 games. Trevor Baptiste has only played in 1. And a player that I don't think a lot of people have been mentioning enough is Patrick Shumate. Has not played the entire season, and I loved his play last year. Now, the Bandits went through a rash of injuries last year, and that forced younger players like a Cam Wires, for example, to step up and do bigger roles and try kind of like trial by fire. Now, who is someone on the back end for the Seals that has kind of stepped up into a bigger role for some of those bigger names that have missed some time?
It's got to be Matt Wright. Got to be Matt Wright.
That's going to tie in my next question because I absolutely love Matt Wright. I said it in the preview show. He's caught attention of Josh Byrne and the rest of the forwards, but he kind of stands out with that weird shaped helmet that it's easier to pick him out on the field, but I've loved his game all season long.
He's, to quote my friend and former NLL broadcaster John Abbott, he is built like a fire hydrant with cheetah legs. Big, strong, dense, and fast as all hell.
Didn't know he was that fast. My God, he was... I did not know he was that fast and had that amount of scrappiness to him. Is he that type of player that, you know, it's you hate to play against, but you love to have him on your team?
Oh, unequivocally, absolutely. You know, because you have that combination of physicality, mental edge, and then just when you forget about him, he runs away from you. You know, I think that they're super encouraged with him, and just watching, this is not even based on conversations I've had just from my own 2 eyes, his development from week 1 to where we are now entering game 11 has been tremendous. You know, and I think that the individual who probably deserves the most credit for that, you know, yes, Cam, their defensive coordinator, is excellent, but people might not be aware that Brody Merrill has actually been working really hands-on as a developmental coach, particularly for the young guys, both hands-on in person during shoot-arounds and practices, but also remotely during the week with video calls, mentor sessions, film study. So, Matt Wright is a wildly different kind of player than Brody was, obviously, and there's no comparison to be made there. But he's got this mentorship in place with probably the best to ever play out the back door, at least, to the point that he retired. There are great guys on the way and great guys you can make as many arguments as you want about that, and that's not my point here. But I just think that Matt has developed so well so quickly, and that's not an accident. I don't think that that's just a product of a guy getting 10 games under his belt and all of a sudden this is what he was always going to be. I think that this has actually been a really, really deliberate developmental process by the Seals coaching staff. And I think that they're a coaching staff in an organization that doesn't get nearly enough credit for player development because they've drafted exceptionally well. You look at some of the names that they've drafted, whether they're still with the Seals or elsewhere in the league, I mean, they have consistently found talent in the draft, and they've developed it sometimes just to move it on, right? Look at Connor Fields, look at Jacob Dunbar, look at Connor Kiernan. Those are all guys who are San Diego picks who are now thriving with other teams because they didn't have space for them at the time, And I don't think Matt Wright's going to be one of those guys. I think they have long-term plans for Matt Wright, but he's just the latest case study in a Patrick Merrill-led coaching staff that is actually really, really good at developing young players. It gets lost in the shuffle because of how much veteran talent they have and how dynamic that Patrick as the GM has been on the trade market and on the free agent market the last 4 years or so. But in the background, quietly, they've developed one of the best young goaltenders in the league. They're developing Matt Wright. They've developed Patrick Shume, who, as you mentioned, has missed the whole season and I think is questionable to play at all, but has been a rock-solid player for them for the last couple of seasons and developed into a high-level NL defender. They've developed Trey LeClaire. These are really adept player development coaches. And I think that ties back into the Trent DeGico question a little bit earlier. I would gamble on Patrick Merrill and his coaching staff to get the most out of Trent DeGico. They consistently show the ability to get the most out of guys. And they'll tell you pretty quickly if they don't think they're going to be able to because they'll move on from them like they did with Mike McCannell, right? They'll make the move if they don't think that they can make it happen. And I don't think that there's any reason to doubt that those two guys, Trent DeGico and Matt Wright, and even down the line, right, Robbie Turpin, who's only played in the one game, when this staff gets their hands on young players, they have a tendency to get better and get better very quickly.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best attributes of a great front office is willing to admit fault or a mistake and move on rather than, to tie it into like NFL. GMs, they might make a bad first-round draft pick, but keep him on the field by trying to prove, okay, this wasn't a mistake. I think the best front offices are able to do that. And I think one of the mistakes they clearly did not make is in net and Chris Irregulari. And I think I would be remiss and I would get in big trouble with my co-host Phil if I didn't ask some questions on Oreg. But, the first couple games of the season, it looked like he was struggling a bit after the explosion that he had last year. But since those first, 2 or 3 games, it looks like he has settled in nicely to be more of that goaltender that we saw take the league by storm last year. I mean, only 22 years old. My God, just last Saturday and this coming up Saturday that you got the call for, the age discrepancy between Vince and Oreg in net is nuts. But I guess my question is, was the early season, I don't even want to use the word struggles, more of a blip? Or was that, maybe the league having a little bit of tape on him and he had to adjust to what adjustments they made on him?
That's a tough one to pinpoint. I think that anytime good scouts get their eyes on players, it makes life more complicated for them, and the best players always adjust to that, and it becomes a cat and mouse game for their entire careers, right? I think with Chris, I said this, on Mike's show earlier this week, the thing that people are generally unaware of is how confident Chris is. And that confidence is literally the first thing that you notice when you interact with him in person. It's not something that's loud. He's not a barker. He's not a yeller. He's not going to yell at his teammates. But he has this unshakable confidence. It's not even just self-belief. It's legitimate, the jock in the high school Disney movie. He is that thoroughly confident in everything. Tall, young, good-looking kid, strong, good player, confident in his preparation, does his workouts, does his tape, does everything. So I think the early season struggles may have something to do with opponents having a little bit more tape on him. I also think that the struggles didn't really matter when you really get down to the brass tacks of it. Chris does not give up bad goals when they matter. He gives up bad goals, usually in the first quarter, sometimes early in the third. That's not great. You'd hope that perhaps that gets developed out over time. But as we saw last weekend, right, he's at his best in crunch time when all the chips are down. He made 16 saves between the fourth quarter and overtime out of his 39. That's a lot. That's a lot of a huge proportion of saves to be made when it matters most. And I think that the reason they were so right in gambling on him is because his demeanor became immediately visible shortly into his first training camp when he was 18 years old. He is always going to win the game between the ears. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to pick up every shooter's tendency and know where they're going before they're going, but it does mean that he will always win the battle with himself, which I think is often the most important part of goaltending. And people like to talk about things like body language and how do you look after you give up a goal. That's a bunch of garbage. How are you actually approaching things in your head? If Chris doesn't have quote-unquote good body language after a goal, it's not because he's doubting himself. It's because he's pissed that he let a goal in. But he doesn't think it's that important to like make some show of strength that I'm unbothered by this. He's just going to go stop the next one. But that's something that you can't know unless you spend time around him and, you know, around the team, just how confident and secure he is. He can give up 5, he can give up 6 and a quarter. He's still going to be good late in the game if they let him play, and they probably will. You know, we saw that earlier this year. You know, did he have his best night against Saskatchewan in the loss? No, they probably would have liked to have a couple more big stops late in that game. Credit the rush. They made some plays. Robert Church had the goal that kind of iced things. It wasn't like he made a bad, you know, it wasn't like he missed one that he should have had between the net. It was a dunk, you know. So when I look at Chris O'Reglieri, my first thought is his best quality is his demeanor, and his second best quality is his clutch performance. And if you were going to rank like 15 goalie qualities to have, those would be number 1 and 2 in whatever order you want to pick. The things like quickness, angles, outlet passing, all of the technical stuff come behind those things because goaltending is so much more mental than it is physical. And he is elite in that aspect of the game. Absolutely pinnacle of what it means to be like mentally developed as a goaltender. But no one talks about it because he's not a big media guy. He doesn't talk to the media much, kind of a shy kid in that context. But as soon as you take him outside of a media environment, he is the center of attention, lights up every room, and could not be more the quintessentially confident young guy. And so that's why I think that, yes, you see the play. Yes, you see what he did in juniors. All it took was one training camp for them to see, oh, he's built different between the ears. It's not just about what he does between the pipes.
Yeah, and especially when you're a goalie, you're the last line of defense. If that ball's in the back of the net, no matter what, people are going to be hammering, hey, it's on you to make that save, even if it was a breakdown in front of you. To have that mindset and that maturity at that young of an age, I can't wait to see what he is in his prime, because I don't even think we're close to his prime yet on what he can and will be in this league. But I just got a couple more for you. I know we're running a little bit longer than I told you we were doing, but that typically happens here on the BSE. Bandits versus Seals. Saturday is just going to be their 6th meeting, and obviously it's the back-to-back. Seals coming off that electric overtime victory, knocking off the Bandits after 16 straight wins. Where do you think the Seals need to improve in this game to sweep that season series? Because that win is great, and a lot of people are just going to be talking about Buffalo's coming off that back-to-back, that rivalry versus Toronto. You got them with tired legs. What does the Seals have to do on their part to not just take down the Bandits again, but improve on what they did in their 14-goal victory last Saturday?
You know, I think there's some things they probably like to tighten up in the back end, but ultimately when Dane Smith and Josh Byrne and Ian McKay are on the other side, you're going to give up goals. It's just going to happen. So I don't think they're going to spend too much time crying over spilt milk, if you will. But I think that if there's anything they need to improve on, it's going to sound silly, but it's what I was talking about being the kind of quasi blueprint to beat Buffalo, the leveraging speed. And I don't think that there's necessarily a ton of room to improve so much as there's room to circle that on the game plan and go do more of this. run them into the ground and make them prove that they lost because their legs were tired, not because they're older than us and we have more in the tank. I don't think it's a whole case of they need to tweak this, tweak that. I think it's that they need to shove the pedal to the metal and make Buffalo prove that they can keep up with them. They very well may be able to. We're going to find out. Like we're going to get to see with our own two eyes on Saturday night. But I think if you were building a game plan, you'd look at that and say, if there was a roster advantage to be had anywhere, it's going to be right there. So let's try and capitalize that and squeeze every last bit of juice out of that thing, get that sponge dry and see what happens. I don't know. I wouldn't bet against Buffalo ever, especially to lose 2 games in a row. That sounds like a pretty heavy lift. There's a lot of gravel involved with that. But if you're San Diego, you have to see that there was a little bit of an advantage to be had in that area of the game. Maybe it was tired legs. Maybe it's youth versus a little bit more age. I don't know. But if I'm Patrick Merrill, and I suspect he'll think similarly, I'm slamming that foot to the gas pedal. I'm slamming that gas pedal to the floor, blowing every yellow light and saying, hey, run, 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 push that thing and make things happen while they're not even on the floor yet.
So obviously back-to-back games, it's a tough ask to win both of them. It's very tough to do. We saw, for an example, Halifax just did it to Philly last 2 weeks, but majority of the time it's going to be a split if it's back-to-back weekends. Even if it's back-to-back games like we just saw with Buffalo, it's tough to win back-to-back games. I'm not going to ask you for a score prediction. We do that on our show, and I think in 4 years I'm the only one that's nailed it twice. But I'm going to ask you what type of game you think it's going to be. Is it going to be a close battle, high-scoring affair, defensive showdown? What type of game are you kind of expecting? I know you're thinking San Diego's going to be that run and gun in that transition, trying to see if Buffalo can keep up. But is that going to be more of a high-scoring affair, or are you going to get more of a goaltending battle that's making those big-time saves in the transition game?
I have a feeling we might see something similar to what we saw in 2023, that 7-6 overtime game. I don't think it'll be that low scoring.
Let's hope not.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really entertaining, fun game. It was. I love a pitcher's duel, but I think we're going to look at something that is a little bit lower scoring. I think the defense is going to be really good, and I think the best part of this is every goal is going to matter a lot. In a game where you win 14-13, at the end of the day, every goal mattered a lot, but they don't feel quite as big. It's like playoff hockey, right? You get a 1-0 lead. All of a sudden, can we make this last the next 2.5 periods? Same kind of thing. I feel like we could definitely see a low-scoring game, something in the 10-9 variety, maybe 9-8. I could see Buffalo winning the game 17-10. I think that's probably just as likely. I think that's likelier than San Diego winning 17-10. Who knows, though? We could get another 14-13 overtime game. Maybe it's Buffalo who wins on the road this time.
So, last one for you. 8 games to go with the Seals. They're sitting in 9th place right now, 5-5. 4 of the remaining 8 games are against teams that are currently in a playoff spot. Now, San Diego is not known to remain stagnant. They've already made a couple deals already this season, one bringing in Dylan Watson, one sending out Sykes. What do you think, if there is a move that they might need to make that push to get them over the top and be a legit threat in the playoffs? Or is it simply just getting healthy and getting some bodies that have been missing a lot of the season back in the lineup?
I think that there's always a temptation to make a move, and I think fans love to see big moves. Patrick also is not gun shy. We joke sometimes, call him Trader Patrick, and there's truth to that. He does love to make a good deal, and he's very good at making deals. I don't think there's anything out there for them, though. The Dylan Watson move was a surprise. I kind of like it more than most people do. I love Drew Belgrave, both as a player and a person. Really just a delightful, fun, kind guy. But Dylan Watson's played really well for them for 3 games, and I think I believe in his ceiling, similar to how the coaching staff feels. Now, whether he gets all the way to being a number 2 overall pick in terms of what his long-term value looks like, I don't know. None of us know. But I think that move was better than what the early grades on it might have suggested. But the biggest reason I don't think that there's a whole lot out there for them is just look at the standings, right? Who's going to be sellers? The Firewolves are too young to sell anybody. The Desert Dogs don't have a lot to sell. Maybe Casey Jackson, but I can't see him making a return to San Diego. I don't think that marriage is going to happen. Toronto's 3-7. They're probably not selling anyway, even if they're out of the playoff picture. Rochester's probably not selling anybody. They're also on the younger side with their core pretty cemented. I don't think the Seals need a ton of help out the back door. If anything, they need left-handed forward help. And, then you get into the 5-5 teams, and everyone's going to be in it down to the last week. So, that's one thing that the league does lose a little bit by losing Panther City is because there's so much parity and because every team, virtually every team got better because of the dispersal draft. There's not as much available on the trade market because no one's really out of contention. So I think it's pretty unlikely. I think it's very unlikely we see anything of significance. Maybe something around the margins. Maybe, like a fifth defender. I could see something like that. Yeah, maybe there is a move out there like Paul Dawson to the Bandits last year. Kind of an aging guy out the back door. Maybe there's an Ian Lord available from Rochester. I don't even know if that's something that would interest them. I don't know if they think they need the help because Kyle Rubis should be back at some point, right? So it's tough to speculate, but I think the state of the league kind of precludes any really interesting big trade deadline moves this year.
Yeah, that's been one of, maybe it might be the only negative of the unified standings, because I think that was one of the best moves that the league's ever done because it's just nonstop action all through the season. But I know we went long. I think I told you around like 30 minutes, but we've been known to do this here on the BSC. But thank you for joining us on the Buffalo Sports Collective. Everyone should already be following you, but for anyone that hasn't, do you want to let everybody know where you can be found and where they can listen to that brand new podcast that's out that I've listened to both episodes? Fantastic job that you and Mackie are doing.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We'll have another one coming out the end of this week here. You can follow me on X, Twitter, whatever the hell you call it, at Cooper Perkins TV, on Instagram at World of Coop. And the NLL Box Out podcast with Mackie and Coop is available Spotify, Apple Podcast, and streaming with video on YouTube. That's twice weekly, once on Tuesday, and I think we're doing Friday. It might be Thursday, so don't quote me on that one. I don't know if that's even been decided yet. But one episode looking back at the week, one episode looking forward at the week. We got interviews with folks from around the league. This week was Wesley Berg, who is such a fun guy to talk to and a great listen always. So make sure to like, subscribe. If you like it, give us a review, leave a rating. But yeah, it's just a pleasure to be on the show. It's good to talk lacrosse, and, here's to hoping we have a really entertaining game on Saturday.
Yeah, good luck on the call, but thank you again for joining us on the BSC, Cooper. Hope to talk to you down the road, maybe a little playoff action between Buffalo and San Diego, but good luck with the podcast, continued success in the broadcasting world, but we will be back on Friday with our normal episode previewing Buffalo versus Seals. It's going to be a little bit easier now that I can know a little bit more in depth on the Seals, so we'll talk to everybody soon.